I customized my first non-Bandai kit, the Kotobukiya Nachhin Tank, that looks like this, into this adorable mean mech and placed him in the ruins of a European battlefield. What is up everyone, welcome to another build. This time I ventured off from my regular preferred brand of kits and customized something I've been wanting to try for a while, and I think it came out really good. The Nachhin Tank is a particularly interesting kit with a unique design and cute little beanies. This is made by Kotobukiya. I've used add-on weapons from Kotobukiya before that I used with my Armored Core 6 inspired Zowert Heavy build. However, this is my first official non-Bandai kit, but definitely won't be my last. I've got an Armored Core and a Metal Gear Rex kit in the backlog. Let me know in the comments below if you are interested in seeing me build and paint those kits. Let's start with the arms. I wanted to break up the large area of the big shoulder mounted shield on each shoulder, so I started by scribing a simple design right down the middle of the shield where it is actually divided by a slight angle. I used a 0.2mm chisel to carve out the line with light passes to start and moving to moderate pressure passes. I also chamfered the edge of one side by running my hobby knife perpendicular to the line. I tilt the blade a little to reduce the drag and the chatter. This makes the panel lines a bit more appealing. I decided to add some expansion armor on the front half and give it more bulk. The upper arm I felt was a bit skinny and I wanted to beef it up, so I tossed it entirely and used the thigh part of the 30-minute missions kit Gardenoa. To be able to insert the arm joint of the Nachhin, I had to remove a part of the Gardenoa knee double joint at the bottom and widen the inside. I also sanded a little bit of the arm joint to be able to fit inside. For the sides of the double joint, I reinforced them and covered the side holes with some small polystyrene sheets. The new elbow of the Nachhin has an attachment point, so I found a part that would fit nicely on it. It's the kneecap of another 30-minute missions kit, the Portanova. But it extended out a little too much, so I cut down the peg and also trimmed a little bit of the wall of the insertion point so that it could sit more closely to the elbow. I had a shield from those 30-minute mission option parts, which I thought would look good on the left arm of the Nachhin. I also attached an arm cannon to sit on top of the shield, which in my mind he could easily detach when ammo runs out. I used some of the hardpoint covers that come with 30-minute missions option parts to cover up exactly what they were made for, unused hardpoints. But I later decided that the hardpoint covers on the sides of the arms were too much and decided to just seal the hole with some epoxy putty. All the fingers on his hand has a seam line running down the middle, which I needed to remove, so I went with the typical plastic cement and squeeze hard technique for the seam line removal. To remove the beads of plastic that squeeze out from the seam, I used a new tool, a ceramic blade. They're not as sharp as a hobby knife, so are less likely to accidentally damage the surface. Perfect for removing seam line beads and mold lines. But they are fragile. They can snap if you bend them too much. In fact, I already snapped the straight end of the blade, but fortunately, this specific blade has another end with a curved edge, which I found to be better at scraping the plastic, so only light pressure over the excess plastic until the surface is flush. I repeated the same process for the seam line on the feet, plastic cement to glue them, and the ceramic blade to scrape off the excess plastic. Here's where a blade shines over an abrasive material to remove the beading, tight corners. I sanded the surface afterwards to get a smooth, uniform finish. The seam line of the leg I decided I would not remove, but instead make them a panel line using the SAB0. I pulled the two pieces slightly apart to create a small gap and ran the scriber down the middle to create a chamfered edge on both sides. When the C-plane was big enough, I closed the gap and used my regular chisel to deepen the new panel line. For his right arm, I had an idea to give him this massive Gatling gun, also from Kotobukiya. But this is really too big for him to hold on his side, so this will be his arm instead. The shoulder peg fits perfectly in the 3mm hole on top. It looks good on his side and gives his silhouette more bulk up top with the cute tiny legs below, exaggerating his already peculiar shape. Now moving on to the main body. Again, I wanted to break up the large flat panels just a little bit. I figured this was a good opportunity to practice some scribing. I sketched a simple panel line design on the side of the front portion which looks like the nose of the mech. It starts from the middle panel going to the front, switching planes about halfway, and goes straight down to the bottom. I made the lines with my 0.2mm scriber. After making the lines, I chamfered the front half on top by scraping the edge with my hobby knife. I pushed the top side plane of the back half by running a wider chisel across it, enough to push it inward without losing the new panel line. Now it looks more appealing than just simple lines even if the design is not complex. I added a vent to the bottom side by using a wide scriber to chisel out the exact width and cleaned it up with the 0.2mm SAB. The Nachhin has a hard point on his flank. I decided to use this hard point and attach the hip armor of the Gundam, which I imagine could be like an auxiliary battery pack. The hard point on that hip armor I covered with a builder parts panel, and the hollow back I filled in with some 2-part epoxy putty. I was planning on putting one on each flank, but the right side didn't have enough space due to the bulk of the Gatling gun, so I ended up with just one on each left side, which is still okay and adds to the asymmetry. I added to the top half of the head that moves up and forward when the hatch opens a few new panel lines on the sides and near the back, as well as a couple of lines on the sides of the hatch that moves up and back. And I then retrofitted the Zowat Heavy's shoulder cannon and missile launcher on him. Similarly, I only added a few simple lines on the back of the Nachhin to add visual interest. With all the heavy extra mass added onto him, I thought he should have something to help him move around so he won't be just a large target. After trying on several boosters and propellant tanks on his back, I settled on using this builder parts non-scale vernier. The design fits well with the flow and shape of his back. And while the size won't allow him to believably have uncanny aerial mobility, it should help him have enough agility to traverse the terrain he finds himself on. I replaced the triangular part on the back of his head with a detail part that looks like a handle. I'm not sure what it's technically called, but I think it looks good on him. To finish things off on his upper body, I added small pieces of styrene cut from styrene strips and glued them to his back head hatch. Moving down to his lower body, I scribed some lines on the front which I will add some detail to later. And also duplicated the notches on the middle part of his hip armor so that it runs across the entire length of his hip armor, which now looks better. On the front center, I scribed this wide line with my 2mm chisel. To add detail to it, I first cut a small length of 2mm half round bar to place in the middle, and then I cut even smaller pieces of 1mm half round bar to place at either end of the 2mm bar. After the glue had completely hardened, I made lines near the edge of the 2mm bar by placing a guide tape on the middle. The result is this detail that will look even better when I'm done painting it, so stick around for that. And to conclude the customization on this build, I again added small pieces of styrene on the sides of the belly, stomach, and also on the front and back ends of his hip armor. I like adding small details like this that are simple yet enhance the appearance of the kit in a significant way. What quick details are your go-to? Let me know in the comments below. With that, we have the final silhouette of my Nachhin Tank. A bit over the top, sure, but the important thing is I made it my own and I'm satisfied. After that test fit, I disassembled the kit and washed everything with soap and water. And after letting them dry for a couple of hours, I was ready to begin laying down colors. I primed all the interior parts and joints with Mr. Surfacer Black 1500. This surfacer allows you to skip painting gloss black before metallics, therefore minimizing paint layers, which is important especially for joints. Although the result won't be as smooth if you were to paint gloss black before metallics, it's still very pleasing and almost looks like brushed metal. The shoulder armor and most of the hardpoint covers I decided to prime with pink surfacer, because I plan to give them a brighter color than what I normally use. I painted them with a nice yellow color, specifically Nazca Mandarin Yellow from Gaia Notes. I also chose to pre-shade them with some orange from Mr. Color. Bright colors are not my wheelhouse, so it was a fun change from my usual. I used Nazca Mandarin Orange for the added armor segments to give the shoulder armor some tonal variation. The shoulder and left arm elbow I primed with Nazca Mecha Surf Super Heavy, which on its own is already a nice dark frame color, and for that reason I kept them as is. The main body and the thighs I primed with regular gray Surfacer, and pre-shaded it with Midnight Blue by Gaia Notes. The base color is a mix of Suzy Blue and Cold White in a ratio of 3:7, with a very tiny amount of yellow and green, not even half a drop of each. A portion of the sides towards the back I painted with Midnight Blue by first masking the bright blue parts. When masking by cutting the shape with a hobby knife, it is ideal to cut from the center going to the edge. This minimizes the risk of dragging the tape if you were to cut from the edge of the tape first going to the center. The lower body and the legs I primed with black Surfacer from Mr. Hobby. And laid down a base of Midnight Blue, once again from Gaia Notes. After the base was dry, I masked the area around the detail in the center that I added. I painted it with off-white for Mr. Color, allowed that to dry, masked the center, and painted the ends with Mandarin Yellow. Removing the masking tape reveals what a nice addition this was to his front, in my opinion at least. The palette for the weapons consisted of Parker Gun Metallic from Mr. Color, which has a nice dark grey cold tone that I used for the Gatling gun barrels and center portion of the shoulder cannon, and a mix of neutral greys from Gaia Notes as well as Nazca Frost Matte Black for the body of the Gatling gun and shoulder weapons. I got the inspiration while I was playing Armored Core 6 and thought that's a nice color for the Gatling gun, dark barrels with a lighter color body. It matches well with the half-bright scheme of my Nachhin and does not contrast the main colors too much. I decided to add a subtle burnt iron effect on the end of the barrels. I began by spraying clear yellow and moved on to spraying clear orange, moving closer to the tip with each color. Finally, I tried Prism Blue Black from Gaia Notes because the product page also showed it being used to replicate burnt effects. The blue is very indistinct, it's a very different burnt iron effect, but I think I still prefer using metallic blue. The final piece on the Nachhin for painting was the part for the eyes. I cut out two oval shapes on a masking tape and placed it on the part. I painted the oval white and removed the masking tape. Don't mind that it's a little rough, you'll see why in a bit. Now that we have a shape for the eyes, we paint over them with some white mixed with a small amount of blue and an even smaller amount of purple to get a colder color than sky blue, almost like a very faint bluish lavender. And then add a little bit of white in the center before spraying it over with some fluorescent white from Display. The reason I did not use the fluorescent white immediately is because this paint doesn't have really good coverage. It's very translucent, but the emitted glow is closer to blue than white in reality, so it works well enough for the intended effect. I top coated everything with a gloss coat. I let it cure to be ready for panel lining and decals. I panel lined everything with the usual Tamiya panel line accent color and cleaned the excess with some lighter fluid. The Nachhin kit comes with water slide decals, which is a surprise relief being used to only seeing these in P Bandai kits. It's a decent amount and I tried to use as much as I could. I winged some placements and followed the suggested for others. But I also added a few more spare 1/100 caution decals I had, some white and orange. When I felt I had enough decals, I masked a couple of areas that I wanted to keep glossy and sprayed everything with a layer of Mr. Super Smooth Clear for a flat finish. After the top coat has cured, time for assembly, which is one of the most rewarding parts of building and customizing, finally seeing everything come together. However, it is also very nerve-wracking as you assemble everything hoping you don't chip it or worse, crack a part that has become too tight. I did chip the paint in a couple of areas, sad to say, but only in places where they wouldn't really be seen. Let me know if you find it. But also, it will matter little as we are going to weather this build anyway. I started the weathering with some Mr. Weathering color, Gray Brown. Mr. Weathering colors are oil-based, so you have a lot of working time with them. That said, you can easily remove them with Mr. Weathering solvent if you are too aggressive. I prefer to work in large sections and apply them first in generous amounts around the section. By the time you finish brushing the first layer, the first area you painted has somewhat dried. I then removed or blended them with a tissue or lint-free wipe or a cotton swab, and then refined the edge with a flat brush damp with Mr. Weathering solvent. They can sort of work like a filter to tone down the saturation of your base colors, as well as a panel liner with the darker colors. After the gray-brown, next up was ground brown. I applied it more sparingly, only on certain spots. I spread them vertically with a cotton swab and then blended the edge with a damp brush to make it look like streaks of dirt and grime. I wanted to give the kit a bit of a subtle dusty or faded look, so I applied Mr. Weathering color white dust on the lower half of vertical panels and on their flat top also. But I think it ended up looking too subtle. After Mr. Weathering color, time to apply some chipping with Vallejo acrylic paints. I mixed a lighter shade of my base colors to start the chipping. I began with the sponge method to apply the chipping, removing much of the paint on the sponge and carefully dabbing the sponge on the panel surface to somewhat control the chipping created. I applied more chipping on his shilts and his lower body. After the sponge, I used my 000 brush with a pointy tip to refine the chipping. This is a process that I'm still studying and honing my technique, but without a doubt I enjoy. Last step of the chipping is for a few well-placed spots of exposed bare metal with metallic acrylic paint. However, this time I only used the paintbrush for application. And that completes the weathering and all the work on the kit. As a base, I had this European scene base I got from an IPMS event last year. It's in 1/35th scale. Perfect for the Nachhin. Although it's a nice base for a vignette, the molding is pretty bad with abundant bubbles, especially on the rubble and brick walls. It's my first time to use a base such as this with problems like these, which I did not know how to correct properly. With that said, I chose to fix it by adding some fine ballast on the areas with bubbles, hoping that they could get filled in or at least covered by the ballast, which I applied with some scenic glue. Upon drying completely and removing the excess or loose ballast, I primed the base with black surfacer so I could apply some post-shading and have some default shadows. I started by airbrushing red-brown from Gaia for the bricks and also a little on the ground debris. Then I highlighted the bricks with oxide red. I proceeded to paint the cobblestone road with Dectan from Tamiya, trying to paint inside each stone to leave a shadow in between them. I also used the Dectan to paint the wooden planks and cement on some of the bricks. With that finished, I was done with my airbrush for the rest of the build. And onto something I have little to no experience with, painting with acrylics. Okay, not totally without experience. I used acrylic for chipping on previous builds as well as this one, and those weathering pencils I used on my goof are acrylic. To start, I applied a generous coat of diluted Iraqi sand on the brick to get a faded or dusty look. It may look a little bit too much right now, but they'll darken a little once they dry. Following that, I used diluted black-brown to tone down some of the bricks and also create contrast to highlight the texture. On some bricks, I painted a less diluted mix to darken them for tonal variety. I mixed red and flat earth to highlight others, and a red-orange mix for brighter bricks to add further variety. I used German field gray to paint the cylindrical looking object, which I really don't know for sure what it is. Maybe an unexploded munition? Or a pillar? Let me know what you think it could be. I also used the same paint for the tarp on the ground close to it. Then I used Iraqi sand to brighten the mix and give them some highlights. I used Iraqi sand once again to paint the wooden planks before giving them a wash with black-brown to add shadows and bring out the textures on them. For the cobblestones, you guessed it, I used a very diluted Iraqi sand from Vallejo. I did this section by section, which I was surprised by how well it turned out. It gave the cobblestones a warmer yet grimier look. I applied a very diluted mix of black, brown, yellow, and red to define the edges of the stone and for separation. I then used black brown to enhance that even further. The last part I painted with acrylics was the ground debris. I began with a wash using black brown and then with flat earth. And final detail work by painting several spots with Iraqi sand and a red-brown mix to add variety to the debris. For a final piece, or rather pieces of details to complete the base, I cut 2mm styrene rods and drilled out one end with a 1.5mm bit. I stuck them standing up to a piece of cardboard with double-sided tape and primed them all black before painting them with Mr. Metal Color Brass. Now we have some empty bullet casings that we can spread over the base near the left arm Gatling gun. And that is it. Thank you for sticking around if you've made it this far. I know this has been a long video. Let me know if you would have preferred the video split in two between the kit and the base. I hope you enjoyed this non-Bandai mecha kit. If you did, or you found this little bugger cool, like the video and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. And as always, have a good day and I'll see y'all in the next build.